In the vast darkness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a truth that chills even the most hardened alien warriors to their core. Never wake a sleeping predator. For 3 centuries, the galaxy had enjoyed relative peace, believing the legendary human war fleets were nothing more than cautionary tales whispered in the shadows of diplomatic chambers. The Terran Federation had retreated to their home systems after the Great Silence, seemingly content to tend their gardens and pursue their strange obsession with art and philosophy. But when the Zephyrian Empire's most desperate hour arrived, when their children faced extinction and their worlds burned under an unstoppable alien horde, they made a choice that would reshape the galaxy forever. They sent a single transmission into the void, directed at a species they had once dismissed as Deathworlders, primitive beings from a planet so hostile it should have never spawned intelligent life. What they awakened was not the peaceful farmers and artists the galaxy had grown comfortable with. What they awakened was humanity's true nature, a species forged in the crucible of a world that tried to kill them every single day, where survival meant becoming the apex predator of apex predators. The Zephyrians thought they were asking for help. They had no idea they were about to witness why humans had once been called the galaxy's most terrifying force of nature. This is the story of what happens when desperation meets fury, when the hunted become the hunters, and when the galaxy learns why you should never, ever threaten something a human has decided to protect. The emergency council chamber on Zephyria Prime buzzed with panicked energy as holographic displays painted the room in harsh red light. Fleet Admiral Kethera stared at the tactical readout, her forearms trembling as she processed the impossible numbers streaming across the screen. The Void Swarm had consumed another 3 systems in the past rotation, leaving behind nothing but empty space and debris fields where once thriving worlds had existed. How many refugees made it out of the Keltharn system? She asked, her translator struggling with the strain in her voice. Commander Vexhal, his scales a sickly gray with stress, manipulated the data feeds with shaking claws. 17 million, Admiral, out of 4 billion. The silence that followed was deafening. Around the curved chamber, representatives from a dozen Zephyrian colonies sat in stunned horror, their various appendages drooping in defeat. The Void Swarm had appeared at the edge of Zephyrian space 6 months ago, a living tide of darkness that consumed everything in its path. Ships, stations, planets, stars themselves, nothing seemed capable of stopping their advance. Every military engagement had ended in complete annihilation of Zephyrian forces. The enemy didn't just destroy, they devoured, leaving behind a cosmic emptiness that made even seasoned space veterans sick to witness. "What about the Galactic Council?" asked Senator Thrillek, her feathered crest flattened against her skull in distress. "Surely they'll send aid now that we've lost 18 systems." Kethera's laugh was bitter. The Andromedans withdrew their fleets to defend their core worlds yesterday. The Centaurians have closed their borders entirely. Even the mighty Draconian Empire has gone silent. She gestured to another display showing the political map of local space, vast swaths now colored in ominous black. "We're alone." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant rumble of orbital defense platforms being hastily constructed around their homeworld. Outside the great transparent steel windows, the night sky flickered with the lights of evacuation ships carrying civilians from the outer colonies. Soon, even those desperate vessels will have nowhere to run. Commander Vexhal cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral, there is one possibility we haven't discussed. All eyes turned to him, hope flickering in alien faces. Kethera leaned forward. "Speak." "The humans," he said quietly. "The Terran Federation. They've remained neutral in galactic politics since the Great Silence. But their military capabilities were once considerable. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several senators began speaking at once, their voices rising in a cacophony of dismissal and outrage. Senator Thrillek's crest flared in indignation. "The Deathworlders? You suggest we appeal to those primitive barbarians for help. They're not even a proper spacefaring civilization anymore," added Counselor Zephyrin, his tentacles writhing with disgust. "They've retreated to their home systems to play with their art and philosophy. What could they possibly do against the Void Swarm that our combined fleets could not?" But Kethera had gone very still, her forearms folded as she accessed her personal memory banks. The classified files she'd studied during her academy training came flooding back. Report from the Hegemony Wars 3 centuries ago, when humanity had first emerged from their single-star system and shocked the galaxy with their brutal efficiency in combat. "You're thinking of the old stories," Vexhal said, reading her expression correctly. "The accounts from the Battle of Proxima Vale, the Siege of Tau Ceti, the massacre at Wolf 359. His voice dropped to almost a whisper at the last words. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the quality of the quiet was different. Ancient fears stirred in the collective memory of the galactic community. The humans had emerged from their death world like a plague of violence, their ships crewed by galactic standards, but horrifyingly effective. They had fought not with honor or according to established rules of warfare, but with a savage pragmatism that had terrified even the most militaristic species. "Those are legends," Thrillek said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Propaganda from a more violent age." "Are they?" Kethera pulled up another display, this one showing deep space reconnaissance data from the Terran systems. Long-range surveys show massive industrial complexes in the outer Sol system, shipyards that could construct vessels the size of small moons, defensive installations that make our fortress worlds look like children's toys. She paused, studying the data. They've been quiet for 3 centuries, yes, but they haven't been idle. Fexhal nodded grimly. Intelligence estimates suggest they've been preparing for something, building up their military capabilities while maintaining the facade of peaceful isolation. He gestured to the reconnaissance images. "Those aren't the installations of a species that's abandoned warfare, Admiral. Those are the preparations of a people who understand that peace is only possible through overwhelming strength." Counselor Zephyrin's tentacles had stopped writhing, his attention fixed on the display. The energy signatures from their outer system installations, they're massive. What would they possibly be powering? "That's what we need to find out," Kethera said firmly. She turned to face the full council, her posture straightening with newfound determination. "I propose we send a diplomatic mission to the Terran Federation. A formal request for military assistance." The reaction was explosive. Half the council began speaking at once, voices raised in anger and fear. The idea of approaching the humans, the Deathworlders who had once painted space red with the blood of their enemies, was almost unthinkable. "They'll demand tribute," Thrillek protested. "Servitude. They're predators, not allies. They'll want our technology," added another counselor. "Our worlds, our resources. We'll be trading one extinction for another." But Kethera raised one of her hands for silence, and gradually the chamber quieted. "Look around you," she said simply. "Look at those displays. In 6 months, maybe less, there won't be a Zephyrian empire left to protect. Our children will be consumed by the Void Swarm. our culture erased from existence. Her voice grew stronger. If there's even a chance the humans can help us, don't we owe it to our people to try? The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. Faced with certain extinction, even the most prideful species would eventually swallow their arrogance. As the sun set over Zephyria Prime's crystal cities, the Council voted to authorize the diplomatic mission. 3 days later, the courier ship, Harmony's Voice, launched from the orbital diplomatic facilities, its destination the Sol System. Captain Rezdar, a veteran of first contact protocols with dozens of species, commanded the small vessel and its crew of linguists, xenobiologists, and cultural specialists. Their mission was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Wake the sleeping giant and pray it chose to help rather than devour. The journey through hyperspace took 4 standard days, but for the crew it felt like an eternity. They studied every available file on human psychology, culture, and military history. The more they learned, the more some of them questioned the wisdom of their mission. Humans, it seemed, were paradoxes wrapped in contradictions. They could create art of breathtaking beauty while simultaneously designing weapons of unimaginable horror. They formed emotional bonds with their pets that lasted lifetimes, yet could wage war with a cold pragmatism that eliminated entire species. They valued individual freedom above all else, while demonstrating an almost supernatural ability to coordinate massive military operations. "Look at this," said Dr. Yildan, the expedition's chief xenobiologist, as she shared a cultural analysis on the ship's central display. "They have a concept called total war, the complete mobilization of a society's resources for military purposes. Every human becomes part of the war machine, from children growing food to elderly citizens manufacturing ammunition." Captain Rezdar studied the data with growing unease. "And they've practiced this concept successfully?" "Multiple times throughout their history," Yildan confirmed. "The casualty figures are substantial." She paused, her feathered crest drooping. "Captain, I'm beginning to wonder if we're making a terrible mistake. What if they decide we're the enemy?" The question haunted them as they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol System. What they found there defied their expectations and sent chills through the crew. The outer system wasn't the quiet backwater they'd expected, but a hive of industrial activity that made the core worlds look primitive by comparison. Massive shipyards orbited the gas giants, their skeletal frameworks stretching for hundreds of kilometers as they assembled vessels that dwarfed anything in the galactic fleet databases. Asteroid mining operations had hollowed out entire planetoids, converting them into fortress installations bristling with weapons that registered off the scale of their sensors. Defense platforms the size of small moons drifted in perfect formation, their energy signatures suggesting power sources that shouldn't have been possible with known technology. "By the void," whispered the navigation officer. "How many ships are they building?" The answer became apparent as they approached the inner system under escort from sleek human patrol craft. Thousands of vessels filled the space around Earth and Mars, from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts that looked more like flying cities than warships. But it was the quality of construction that truly impressed and terrified the Zephyrian crew. These weren't the crude, functional vessels humanity had used in their early wars. These were works of engineering art, elegant and deadly in equal measure. Their escort guided them to Luna Station, a vast orbital facility that served as humanity's primary diplomatic and commercial hub. As they docked, Captain Rezdar couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by predators who were deciding whether the newcomers were friends, food, or threats. The human delegation that met them was led by Director Sarah Chun, a middle-aged woman whose calm demeanor and gentle smile did nothing to hide the calculating intelligence in her dark eyes. She spoke perfect Zephyrian, her translator apparently unnecessary, and greeted them with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Welcome to Luna Station," she said, gesturing for them to follow her through corridors that hummed with quiet efficiency. "It's been far too long since we've hosted Zephyrian diplomats. I trust your journey was pleasant." The casual friendliness somehow made the encounter more unsettling than outright hostility would have. Captain Rezdar found himself studying Chin's movements, noting the predatory grace that marked her as someone comfortable with violence despite her diplomatic role. They were escorted to a conference room with magnificent views of Earth, the blue and green worlds spinning peacefully in the void. Chin offered them refreshments while they waited for the arrival of the human leadership, and the conversation remained pleasant and superficial until Admiral Jackson Williams entered the room. If Director Chun was unsettling in her friendly professionalism, Williams was absolutely terrifying in his quiet competence. The human military leader was tall even by human standards, his graying hair and weathered face speaking of decades in service. But it was his eyes that made the Zephyrian delegation want to flee, pale blue and utterly cold. They were the eyes of someone who had seen the worst the universe could offer and had survived by becoming something even worse. "Captain Rezdar," Williams said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and barely contained violence. "I understand you have urgent business to discuss. Something about a military crisis in your space." The moment of truth had arrived. Captain Rezdar stood, his diplomatic training warring with every survival instinct screaming at him to run. "Admiral Williams, Director Chun, thank you for receiving us. I come bearing a message from Fleet Admiral Kithra and the Emergency Council of the Zephyrian Empire." He paused, gathering his courage. "We request military assistance against an existential threat to our people." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Williams and Chin exchanged a look that conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. Finally, the Admiral leaned back in his chair, his cold eyes never leaving the Zephyrian captain's face. "Tell us about this threat," he said simply. "Tell us everything." Captain Rezdar spent the next 3 hours describing the Void Swarm in excruciating detail. He showed holographic recordings of the attacks, energy readings from consumed systems, and tactical analyses of every failed engagement. The human delegation listened in absolute silence, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated a disturbing understanding of military strategy and xenobiology. When the presentation finally ended, Admiral Williams sat motionless for long moments, his pale eyes studying the frozen hologram of a swarm ship consuming a Zephyrian dreadnought. The alien vessel writhed with organic tendrils that pulsed with stolen energy, its hull a nightmare fusion of living tissue and advanced technology. "Fascinating," he said finally. "A hive mind species that converts matter into more of itself. Exponential growth, perfect coordination, no apparent psychological weaknesses to exploit." He turned to Director Chun. "Analysis?" Chin nodded grimly. "The energy signatures match theoretical models for dark matter manipulation. If they can tap into that power source, conventional weapons would be essentially useless against them." She pulled up additional data on her personal tablet. The consumption rate suggests they're not just feeding, they're preparing for something much larger. "Preparing for what?" asked Dr. Yildan, her translator crackling with the stress in her voice. Williams and Chin exchanged another look before the Admiral answered. Galactic core breach. If they consume enough matter and energy, they could destabilize the central black hole, turn our entire galaxy into a feeding ground. His matter-of-fact tone made the apocalyptic scenario somehow more terrifying. Captain Rezdar felt his hope crumbling. If the humans understood the threat this clearly and still seemed calm, perhaps even they couldn't stop it. Admiral, we've lost 26 systems. Our combined fleet strength has been reduced by 70%. The Galactic Council has abandoned us, and our remaining forces can delay them for maybe 2 more months. He straightened, forcing dignity into his posture. We're asking for help not just for the Zephyrian Empire, but for all sentient life in the galaxy. The silence stretched again until Williams stood and walked to the observation window. Earth rotated peacefully below, its cities glittering like scattered jewels against the darkness. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the deck plating seem to vibrate. 312 years ago, the Zephyrian Empire voted to embargo human colonies after we refused to surrender our defense platforms. You called us dangerous primitives and a threat to galactic stability. He turned back to face the delegation, his expression unreadable. The Andromedans supported that embargo. So did the Draconians, the Centaurians, and every other member of the Galactic Council. Rezdar sich sank. They had come here desperate for help, only to be reminded of their species' past arrogance and prejudice. Admiral, I understand our people have had differences in the past. Differences? Williams interrupted, his voice still calm, but somehow more dangerous. You tried to starve us into submission. When that failed, you supported the hegemony's attempt to blockade Sol itself. He gestured to the bustling activity visible through the station's windows. Everything you see here exists because humanity learned we could only depend on ourselves for survival. Director Chen leaned forward her chair. Captain, help me understand something. In all your diplomatic archives, how are humans typically described? The question caught Rezdar off guard. We generally refer to your people as aggressive, unpredictable. The term Deathworlder is commonly used, referring to your planet's hostile environment and its effect on your psychology. And yet, Chun continued smoothly, when faced with extinction, you came to the aggressive, unpredictable Deathworlders for help. Why? Dr. Yildan shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Because we're desperate. And because despite our past disagreements, humans have never engaged in genocide or species extinction. Your warfare has always been territorial or political, never existential. Admiral Williams returned to his seat, and for the first time since the meeting began, something resembling a smile touched his lips. Doctor, you've just identified the fundamental difference between humanity and every other species we've encountered. We don't fight to destroy civilizations. We fight to preserve them, sometimes from themselves. I don't understand, Rezdar admitted. 3 centuries ago, when the galaxy united against us, we could have responded with total war. Our industrial capacity was already impressive, our population highly motivated, and our military technology advancing rapidly. Williams pulled up holographic displays showing historical battle records. Instead, we withdrew to our home systems and focused on defense. We let the galaxy believe we had become peaceful farmers and artists. Shin took over the explanation. What we actually did was prepare. We studied every species, every military doctrine, every possible threat scenario. We built not just weapons and ships, but an entire civilization dedicated to the principle that if war ever came to humanity again, we would be ready. The implications were staggering. For 3 centuries, while the galaxy had grown complacent in its perceived superiority, humanity had been quietly becoming the most formidable military power in known space. They had allowed themselves to be dismissed and forgotten while building the capability to destroy anyone who threatened them. But you haven't used this power, Resdar pointed out. You've remained isolated. Because we didn't need to use it, Williams replied. Deterrence only works if potential enemies believe you're capable of destroying them. The galaxy thinking we were weak served our purposes perfectly. His expression grew grim. Until now. A new voice entered the conversation as the conference room doors opened to admit another human. This one was younger than Williams, with the lean build and quick movements of someone who spent their time in combat rather than briefing rooms. Colonel Marcus Rivera introduced himself as the commander of humanity's Rapid Response Forces. Admiral, we've completed the analysis of the Zephyrian sensor data, Rivera reported, his manner crisp and professional. The Void Swarm represents a Class 5 existential threat. If current consumption rates continue, they'll have enough mass and energy to attempt galactic core destabilization within 18 standard months. Williams nodded grimly. Military assessment. Conventional warfare is ineffective. The swarm's ability to convert destroyed ships into additional units makes direct engagement counterproductive. However, analysis suggests several potential vulnerabilities. Rivera activated a holographic display showing complex tactical projections. Their hive mind structure requires quantum entanglement communication across vast distances. Disrupt that network and their coordination collapses. How do we disrupt quantum entanglement? Asked Dr. Yildan. Rivera's smile was predatory. We've been developing some interesting technologies during our period of isolation. Quantum field manipulators, dark matter weapons, stellar engineering capabilities. He gestured to another display showing weapon systems that looked more like force of nature than conventional military hardware. The question isn't whether we can stop the Void Swarm. The question is whether we should. The blunt statement hit the Zephyrian delegation like a physical blow. They had come seeking help, only to discover that humanity possessed the power to save them, but was considering whether they deserved salvation. Captain Resdar stood slowly, his diplomatic composure finally cracking. Admiral Williams, Director Chun, I understand that our people have not always been allies. I know the Zephyrian Empire participated in the isolation of humanity 3 centuries ago. But I'm not asking for mercy for politicians or military leaders. I'm asking for the lives of billions of innocent civilians who will die if the swarm continues its advance. Williams studied him for a long moment, then turned to his colleagues. Military recommendations. Colonel Rivera consulted his tactical displays. Full mobilization would require approximately 6 standard months. We need to activate reserve fleets, deploy advanced weapon systems, and coordinate with any remaining galactic forces. Estimated casualties for human forces range from minimal to moderate, depending on execution. Political implications? Williams asked Chun. Significant, she replied. Full military intervention would end our isolation policy permanently. The galaxy would know exactly what we're capable of, which could destabilize the current power structure. Some species might see us as liberators, others as conquerors. And if we refuse, the Void Swarm continues its expansion, likely reaching human space within 5 to 7 years. At that point, we'd be fighting alone against a significantly larger and more powerful enemy. The logic was inescapable, but Williams seemed to wrestle with the decision. Finally, He stood and walked again to the observation window, his hands clasped behind his back. Captain Rezdar, I'm going to tell you something that very few non-humans have ever heard. The reason humanity withdrew from galactic politics wasn't just because of the embargo and isolation attempts. It was because we recognized something about ourselves that terrified us. He turned back to face the delegation, his cold eyes reflecting depths of experience that chilled their alien souls. We're very good at warfare. Frighteningly good. Give us an enemy and a cause, and we become something that makes the Void Swarm look like a minor nuisance. The galaxy was right to fear us, Captain, because when humanity goes to war, we don't just fight to win. We fight to ensure the enemy can never threaten anyone ever again. The silence in the room was absolute except for the hum of life support systems and the distant thrum of the station's rotation. Finally, Williams reached a decision that would reshape the galaxy. Colonel Rivera, initiate Operation Awakening. Full fleet mobilization, all reserves activated. Director Chun, prepare diplomatic notices for every remaining galactic government. Tell them humanity is ending its isolation to address the Void Swarm threat. He turned back to the Zephyrian delegation. Captain Rezdar, you'll accompany our fleet as liaison. Your people will get their help. Relief flooded through the alien diplomats, but Williams wasn't finished. However, understand this clearly. Once we commit to this course of action, there's no stopping until the swarm is completely eliminated. We don't fight limited wars or negotiate conditional surrenders. When humanity goes to war, we go to war to end wars. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The Void Swarm made the mistake of threatening something we've decided to protect. They're about to learn why that was the last mistake they'll ever make. As alarms began sounding throughout Luna Station, and the greatest military mobilization in galactic history commenced, Captain Rezdar realized they hadn't just asked for help from humanity. They had awakened something that had been sleeping in the darkness of space, waiting for a cause worthy of its terrible purpose. The Void Swarm had consumed 26 star systems and believed themselves unstoppable. They were about to discover what happened when predators met apex predators, when the hunters became the hunted, and when the species that had conquered the most dangerous planet in known space decided that someone else's children needed protecting. The galaxy would never be the same, and Captain Rezdar wasn't entirely certain that was a good thing. The transformation of human space was unlike anything Captain Rezdar had ever witnessed. Within 72 hours of Admiral Williams' decision, the Sol system had become a hive of military activity that defied comprehension. Shipyards that had operated at minimal capacity suddenly roared to life, their assembly lines working around the clock to complete vessels that had been under construction for decades. Reserve fleets emerged from hidden bases throughout the outer system, their crews comprised of humans who had lived their entire lives preparing for a war they hoped would never come. Rezdar stood on the observation deck of the human dreadnought Indomitable, watching as the main battle fleet assembled in high orbit around Mars. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering that combined elegant design with devastating functionality. The smallest destroyers were larger than Zephyrian heavy cruisers, while the dreadnoughts dwarfed anything in the galactic fleet databases. "Impressive, isn't it?" said Commander Sarah Torres, the human liaison assigned to help the Zephyrian delegation understand their host's military capabilities. She was younger than Admiral Williams, but carried herself with the same quiet confidence that marked all the human military personnel Rezdar had encountered. "How many ships are in the main battle group?" he asked, trying to process the scale of what he was seeing. "This formation? About 1,200 vessels, including support ships and logistics craft. Torres pointed to different sections of the fleet. 8 heavy dreadnoughts, 36 cruiser squadrons, 72 destroyer flotillas, and approximately 400 specialized warfare vessels. She paused. This represents roughly 40% of our total fleet strength. The numbers were staggering. The entire Zephyrian military at full strength had fielded perhaps 300 frontline vessels. What he was seeing represented more firepower than the combined fleets of the old Galactic Council, and the humans were treating it as a routine deployment. "Commander, may I ask you something?" Rezdar said carefully. "Your people have built all of this during 3 centuries of supposed isolation. What were you preparing for?" Torres considered the question thoughtfully. "Everything," she said finally. "We analyzed every possible threat scenario. Invasion by galactic powers, encounters with hostile unknown species, natural disasters, technological singularities, even the possibility of something like your void swarm." She gestured to the fleet surrounding them. "Humans have a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We hoped we'd never need these ships, but we prepared as if we knew we would." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the ship's communication system. Admiral Williams' voice carried clearly through the corridors, addressing not just the crew of the Indomitable, but every human vessel in the gathering fleet. "Attention all hands, this is Admiral Williams. In approximately 6 hours, we will depart Sol System for the first combat deployment of human forces in over 3 centuries. Our mission is simple: eliminate the existential threat known as the Void Swarm and protect the civilian populations of the affected regions." His voice carried absolute conviction. "Every one of you has trained your entire life for this moment. You know your duties, you trust your equipment, and you understand the stakes. The galaxy is about to see what happens when humanity goes to war, not for conquest or glory, but for the protection of innocent life." The announcement concluded with operational details that made Rezdar's head spin. Fleet formations, jump coordinates, weapons protocols, and logistical requirements were communicated with a precision that spoke of decades of preparation. Nothing was left to chance, no contingency unconsidered. As the massive fleet prepared to depart, Rezdar received a priority communication from Admiral Kethera. The holographic image of the Zephyrian commander appeared in his quarters, her 4 arms gesturing frantically as she spoke. "Captain, what can you tell us about human military capabilities? Our long-range sensors are detecting energy signatures from the Sol System that don't match anything in our databases." "Admiral, I'm not sure you want to know the full truth," Rezdar replied carefully. "The humans have been more productive during their isolation than anyone imagined." "Explain." He spent the next hour briefing Kethera on everything he had learned, from the massive industrial complexes to the scale of the human fleet. When he finished, the Admiral sat in stunned silence for several minutes. "By the void," she whispered finally, "what have we awakened?" "I believe we've awakened exactly what we need," Rezdar said. "But, Admiral, I think it's important that you understand something about human psychology. They don't fight limited wars or negotiate partial victories. When they commit to military action, they commit completely until the enemy is utterly defeated." "Are you saying they might turn on us after dealing with the swarm?" "No," Rezdar said firmly. "I'm saying they'll eliminate the Void Swarm so thoroughly that it will never threaten anyone again. The humans don't just win wars, Admiral. They end them permanently." The human fleet departed Sol System 12 hours later in a display of coordinated power that redefined Rezdar's understanding of military capability. 1,200 vessels moved as one, their formation so perfect it seemed almost alive. The jump to hyperspace generated energy readings that briefly outshone nearby stars. And then they were gone, carrying the fury of awakened humanity toward their distant enemy. The journey to the combat zone took 8 standard days, during which Resdar was given unprecedented access to human military planning sessions. What he witnessed challenged every assumption about warfare he had ever held. The humans didn't just plan to engage the Void Swarm. They had developed multiple contingency strategies for dealing with every possible variation of the enemy's response. The key insight, explained General Patricia Morrison, the fleet strategic coordinator, is that the swarm operates as a single organism with distributed intelligence. Kill the right nodes in the right sequence, and the whole network collapses into chaos. She showed him tactical displays that mapped out swarm formations with frightening accuracy. We're not planning to fight them ship to ship. We're planning to perform surgery on their collective consciousness. The first indication that they had entered the war zone came from long-range sensors detecting massive debris fields where Zephyrian colonies had once thrived. The sight of entire solar systems reduced to scattered wreckage affected even the stoic human crew members, their expressions hardening with resolve as they witnessed the scale of destruction. Admiral Williams called a final briefing as they approached the current front lines. The main holographic display showed the Void Swarm's latest position, a writhing mass of organic ships that stretched across 3 star systems, slowly but inexorably advancing toward the Zephyrian core worlds. Intelligence estimates put their current fleet strength at approximately 50,000 individual vessels, ranging from fighter analogs to massive capital ships the size of small moons. Williams began. They've consumed the matter from 41 star systems, converting it into additional units and infrastructure. The scale was almost incomprehensible. How do we fight something that large? Asked Colonel Rivera. Williams activated another display showing human tactical projections. We don't fight their fleet. We fight their mind. The display zoomed in on specific formations within the swarm, highlighting vessels that pulsed with different energy signatures. Analysis of Zephyrian combat records shows that certain ships appear to coordinate others. Quantum entanglement communication nodes that maintain the collective consciousness. Command ships, Torres breathed. Exactly. Eliminate the command nodes in a correct sequence, and sections of the swarm will lose coordination. Create enough chaos in their network, and the entire collective could fragment into individual units fighting without central direction. Dr. Yildan, who had been studying the tactical displays with growing excitement, suddenly straightened. Admiral, this strategy requires unprecedented precision. You need to identify and target specific vessels within a formation of thousands while under heavy fire. William's cold smile was answer enough. Doctor, you're about to see what 3 centuries of technological development and military preparation can accomplish. The Battle of the Kepler Nebula began 18 hours later when human scout ships made contact with the leading edge of the Void Swarm. The initial engagement was brief but decisive. Human vessels engaged enemy scouts at maximum range with weapons that didn't appear on any galactic database, then withdrew before the swarm could respond effectively. Phase 1 complete, reported the tactical officer aboard the Indomitable. Enemy formation is responding as predicted. Main force adjusting course to intercept. What followed was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. The human fleet didn't charge forward in a heroic frontal assault or attempt to outmaneuver their massive enemy. Instead, they executed a strategy of surgical precision that targeted the fundamental nature of the swarm's existence. Long-range weapons platforms deployed throughout the nebula opened fire simultaneously, their quantum torpedoes phasing through normal matter to target the swarm's communication nodes directly. The exotic weapons bypassed conventional shielding and armor, disrupting the quantum entanglement fields that linked the collective consciousness. The effect was immediate and devastating. Sections of the swarm formation began to drift apart as command structures collapsed. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination suddenly found themselves operating as individuals, their hive mind fractured by the loss of critical communication links. All units, commence Phase 2. Admiral Williams ordered calmly. Target disrupted formations with conventional weapons. Remember, we're not trying to destroy every ship. We're trying to break their ability to function as a collective. The main human battle line advanced through the chaos like a sword cutting through silk. Their ships moved with mechanical precision, each weapon firing at predetermined targets, while point defense systems eliminated any swarm units that came too close. It was slaughter, but slaughter with a purpose. Every destroyed enemy vessel weakened the collective consciousness further. Captain Rezdar watched from the Indomitable's bridge as humanity demonstrated why the galaxy had once feared them. This wasn't the brutal, chaotic warfare he had expected from Deathworlders. This was warfare elevated to an art form, each move calculated and executed with flawless precision. Sensors are detecting massive disruption in swarm command networks, reported the tactical officer. Estimate 40% of their fleet has lost coordination. Phase 3, Williams ordered. Deploy the stellar engineers. What happened next would be remembered in galactic history as the moment humanity announced its return to galactic affairs. Specialized human vessels, previously hidden in the nebula's depths, activated stellar manipulation technologies that had been theoretical impossibilities just centuries before. They began to destabilize the local star, its nuclear fires flaring with artificial intensity. The stellar flare that erupted from the manipulated star washed over the remaining swarm formations like a cleansing fire. The exotic radiation disrupted their organic technology and severed the remaining quantum communication links. What had been a coordinated fleet of 50,000 vessels became isolated groups of confused organisms, no longer capable of collective action. The final phase was almost anticlimactic. Human forces methodically eliminated the scattered swarm remnants, while rescue ships began searching for survivors from destroyed colonies. The battle that military analysts had predicted would last months or years was over in less than 36 hours. In the aftermath, as medical ships tended to rescued civilians and engineering vessels began the long process of clearing debris fields, Captain Rezdar stood again on the Indomitable's observation deck. The space around them, which had been filled with the writhing mass of an existential threat, now contained only the ordered formations of human vessels and the grateful signals of liberated colony ships. "It's over," he asked Commander Torres, hardly believing what he had witnessed. "The main threat is eliminated," she confirmed. "There may be isolated swarm remnants scattered throughout the galaxy, but without their collective consciousness, they're just individual predators, dangerous to single ships or small colonies, but not capable of the systematic consumption we witnessed." Admiral Williams appeared beside them, his expression showing the first signs of satisfaction Rezdar had seen from him. "Captain, you'll be pleased to know that we've received surrender communications from 17 separate swarm fragments. Without their hive mind, they seem to retain individual intelligence and survival instincts." The implications were staggering. The Void Swarm hadn't just been defeated. It had been transformed from an existential threat into a manageable problem. The human strategy had been so precise, so effective, that they had essentially performed surgery on a galactic-scale organism. What happens now? Resdar asked. Williams gazed out at the dispersing human fleet, already beginning to organize into humanitarian and reconstruction formations. Now we help your people rebuild. The swarm consumed 41 star systems, but the stars themselves remain. With proper terraforming and industrial support, those worlds can be restored within a few decades. And humanity? Will you return to isolation? The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. I don't think that's possible anymore, Captain. The galaxy has seen what we're capable of when aroused to action. Some species will welcome our presence. Others will fear it. He turned to face the Zephyrian diplomat. The question is whether the galactic community can learn to see us as protectors rather than conquerors. As the rescued colonists sent their messages of gratitude across subspace, and human relief ships began the enormous task of humanitarian assistance, Captain Resdar realized that everything had changed. The galaxy had sent a desperate transmission to awaken the human war fleet, but what they had really awakened was humanity's true nature, not as Deathworld predators or savage warriors, but as the species that had decided the universe needed protectors. The Void Swarm was gone, consumed not by greater darkness, but by the light of beings who had learned that the greatest strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary to protect the innocent. The galaxy would never again dismiss the quiet farmers and artists of the Sol system, because they now understood the truth that humanity had always known. Peace was not the absence of the capacity for violence, but the choice not to use it except when all other options had been exhausted. The age of human isolation was over, and a new chapter in galactic history had begun.